So back in 1911, the Edmonton Evening Journal ran an editorial titled, "We Want No Dark Spots in Alberta." It was a transcription of a speech by a Conservative MP from Lethbridge, a man named Mr. C.E. Simmons. Now, sadly, it was not a call for a better provincial electricity system. It was, in fact, his response to the fact that a population of African, Caribbean, and Black Albertans had risen to about 1,000 people. 1,000 out of over 374,000 people that were living in the province at the time, about 1/3 of a percent. For Mr. Simmons and the boards of trade in Strathcona, Calgary, Fort Saskatchewan, and Morinville, who'd all drafted a petition to Prime Minister Laurier and collected about 3,000 signatures calling to end Black immigration to Alberta, a mere 1,000 Black people in our province was too much. Now, I dare say the true dark spots in Alberta at that time were in the hearts of folks like Mr. Simmons, each of the folks that signed that petition. But I will say the history of our province is in fact marked by thousands of very bright spots. The lives and stories of Black Albertans who have stood proud, who have worked hard to build a life for themselves and their families, who've invested in their communities, made significant contributions to help make our province what it is today. Individual candles that all lit together are part of a mighty flame. Let's share a few of those stories with you here tonight. Some of that history. Now, it started in the early 1800s. Handful of Black men who came west to work in the fur trade. We had Joseph Lewis, Glasgow Crawford, Stephen Bonga, Dave Mills. Now, the first Black woman we have recorded living in Alberta was a woman named Annie Auntie Saunders. She came to Alberta from the southern U.S. in 1877, working as a cook and nanny. 3 years later, they moved to Pincher Creek, and she became a serial entrepreneur. She ran a laundry, a restaurant, and a boarding house for students. She was followed by probably our most famous early Black pioneer, John Ware, cowboy and ranchman who introduced longhorn cattle to Alberta. In the early 1900s, we saw the first significant wave of Black immigration. So from 1900 to 1911, as I said, we saw about 1,000 Black settlers come to Alberta from the southern U.S. They were attracted to the offer of free land and an opportunity to escape what was rampant discrimination in the American South. As I noted, they unfortunately found that racism existed north of the border too, and it was effective. The pressure that was put by Mr. Simmons and others convinced the Canadian government to mount a multi-pronged suppression campaign that pretty much ended Black immigration by 1912. But that dark maneuver failed to put out the light of those that were already here. Those 1,000 settlers founded communities like Amber Valley, Breton, Wildwood. They built churches and schools. They held epic community picnics that attracted people from across the provinces to attend. The Amber Valley baseball team was known and celebrated across Alberta. And those individuals fought for their rights and the rights of others. In Edmonton, a mother, Ms. Poston, fought city council for the right to bring her children to a public pool. Lulu Anderson in Edmonton, Charles Daniels in Calgary fought back against theaters that kicked them out for daring to sit in the white section on their main floors. The Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the first union to represent Black workers, successfully fought for the rights of Black men in one of the only jobs they could get at the time. And also alongside the Calgary Labor Council to expand protections for all workers in Alberta with the Fair Employment Practices Act. Ted King, the brother of the first Black woman in Canada to become a lawyer, you may have heard of her, Violet Henry King. Or Violet King Henry, rather, my apologies. Went to court against a hotel that denied him a room. And that led to changes in legislation to ban discrimination in accommodations. Those early settlers fought to expand their economic opportunities too, because there was limited work available for Black men and women. So many of them opted to start their own businesses serving their own communities, something familiar to many newcomers from Africa today. In Edmonton, a single mother named Hattie Melton, well, she opened a restaurant, Hattie's Harlem Chicken Inn. It quickly became a hot spot for the Black community in Edmonton. Because unfortunately, most restaurants in the city at the time were segregated and would not serve you. And as Hattie found success, she was committed to giving back to her community. They say no one ever left Hattie's restaurant hungry, even if they couldn't pay. She sponsored a ladies softball team, the Harlem Chicks. And Hattie Melton hired countless young black women, giving them jobs as waitresses at a time when they could not find work anywhere else. And later, as more opportunities came up in post-secondary education, like we saw with Violet King Henry, she helped many of them earn enough to go to university. Those are just a few of the stories that make up the beginnings of black history in Alberta. And together, all of these stories, they form the foundation on which generations of African, Caribbean, and black people who have come here in the decades since have built our lives. The wave of workers from the Caribbean that began in the 50s grew through the 60s and 70s. My father was among them. He came here to Edmonton as an electrician in 1967 from Trinidad and Tobago. Immigrants from a wide range of African nations, starting in the 80s and continuing through to today. Some of them, like the early black settlers, fleeing chaos, discrimination, oppression, and violence. Others were simply just seeking better opportunities for themselves and their families. Hundreds of thousands of them. More stories that have been lived out here on these lands, that are being lived out today. More stories of black histories, the reality of life for black Albertans today, and the possibilities for black futures. In Black History Month, we celebrate them all. And why is that important? Well, it's important because stories hold power. And whose stories get told tell you who holds power. Who's valued, who's seen, who's considered when decisions get made, who's at the decision-making table. Stories, real stories of real people, are one of the most powerful tools we have to build connections with each other and to combat hatred and change hearts and minds. To change the way we see the world. I mean, it's a lot harder to hate somebody when you know their story. And in telling our stories and celebrating the lives, the challenges, the accomplishments of those who went before us and black Albertans today, we expand what's possible for our province and all who live here in the future. There's so many other representations too of who Albertans are. Who Albertans have been, who Albertans are going to be. We see it every day in our workplaces, in our communities, in our streets. We see it right here in this room tonight. We are Albertans. And we're here to work to build a province, communities where we all can thrive, to be seen, represented, and heard as part of the rich diversity of who Albertans are. To tell all of those stories. To celebrate and benefit from the diversity of who we are, to fight for equity and access and opportunity, the inclusion of every member of our communities. And at a time, I think, when we have to acknowledge, when we look around the world, and sometimes uncomfortably close to home, we're sadly seeing the return of voices of anger, hatred, and division, who out of fear or pursuit of power or profit want to drag us back to a very small definition of who we are, of who deserves to access opportunity or share in power. To pit communities against communities, even our province against our country. It's more important than ever that we continue to stand our ground, to tell our stories, to celebrate our communities, and stand tall as proud Albertans and proud Canadians. To light our candles in the face of a growing darkness. Black History Month is part of that. It is part of acknowledging that we are from here. We belong here. And we welcome others to join us here in both remembering and celebrating the history of all who have lived on these lands, and in exploring the possibilities of the bright future we can build here together.